something truly shocking from an Australian Premier in Beijing yesterday. Mark McGowan bagging the Chinese dictatorship's critics back here. You know, a couple of days before she died last year, I had my friend Kimberley Kitching, the Labor Senator, over for lunch. She'd warned for years against the Chinese dictatorship. And I asked her a question just before she left. This is a couple of months before the Albanese government got in. And Labor back then was saying, with Scott Morrison. Now, I asked Kimberley, is that true? And she said 2 words: hell no. To be fair, the Albanese government has kept the line more or less, but the dirty work of appeasement is being done by 2 Labor premiers. Victoria's Daniel Andrews, Western Australia's Mark McGowan, who yesterday disgraced himself on the first day of his 5-day trip to China. Now, is that a lunch thrown for him by the China-Australia Chamber of Commerce, is sitting next to or near Australia's ambassador and the Chamber's chair and other guests. And he must have known he was being filmed by a Chinese crew, in fact. And the film was then sent around by his office. And what it showed was an Australian Premier in communist China attacking the former Morrison Liberal government, and especially the Liberals' defence spokesman today, Andrew Hastie, for being a critic of a dictatorship that's banned democracy, locked up innocent Australians, hit Australia with trade bans and cyber attacks, and threatened war over democratic Taiwan. Now, this recording I'll show you shows McGowan saying, well, he liked Liberal Finance Minister Matthias Cormann, who had the same view as him, allegedly, but Cormann was the odd one out among those wicked Liberals, and he then turned on Hastie, a former SAS officer and Assistant Minister for Defence. The Chinese dictatorship would have loved that. All of it set in Beijing and in front of a camera, and here was one of their useful idiots coming crawling for China's trade and attacking Australians back home who see this dictatorship as a threat to our freedom. I find it disgusting. Now, of course, it's not surprising, perhaps, that McGowan doesn't prize freedom like Hastie does. I mean, he's a bit of an autocrat, isn't he? Locking away Western Australia for so long during the pandemic. And Hastie himself made that point in what was an unusually angry response from a serious Christian.
As I said, this is a Premier who's a prison guard out of work post-pandemic. He's looking for work.
And as Hastie says, if McGowan is saying this in public in China, what is he saying behind closed doors?
I wasn't surprised that he was running down Australian MPs in China, but I was surprised that he'd do that, given that he was a former legal officer in the Royal Australian Navy. And I think when you're overseas and you're representing our country, you keep those sorts of comments to yourself and you back in your colleagues across the parliaments, regardless of what party they're in. So I think it's pretty damaging, and frankly, it shows that he's out of his intellectual depth.
And what really infuriates me is that McGowan is such a hypocrite. And let me tell you why. Before McGowan left for China, Nick Coyle tried to reach him. You've seen him on the show. Coyle is the partner of Cheng Lei, the Australian journalist who so far spent 2 years in a Chinese jail on bogus charges that she leaked state secrets. In truth, she's really seems to be a hostage to warn Chinese Australians here to shut up. Coyle wanted McGowan to ask Chinese officials to help Cheng, who hasn't spoken to her children since her arrest. And you might think that McGowan might show some sympathies, especially since Cheng Lei's father lives in his state, but Coyle didn't even get the courtesy of a response. Pushed by journalists later, McGowan's office just said, well, Cheng Lei's nightmare was not their business. The Premier will not raise specific foreign policy matters as they are the responsibility of the federal government. And Coyle got the same runaround when he appealed personally to Premier Andrews for help, ahead of his mysterious suck-up tour of China last month. Again, no response, even though Cheng Lei's children are Victorians. And journalists were again told, well, foreign policy, that's for the federal government. It's not for a premier. Yet here was McGowan, on day one of his tour of China, publicly offering his unsolicited opinions on foreign policy, how the Liberals had it all wrong and we should smile more at the dictator. What a hypocrite. What a useful idiot. And who else would McGowan sell out for the sniff of the dictatorship's trade?